Hello and welcome back to the Yosemite Server Backup video tutorial series. In this video we're going to cover creating and configuring a virtual library device for use as a backup target. We'll go ahead and launch the Yosemite Server Backup Administrator. This will open to the Tasks page of Yosemite Server Backup, where we'll select the option to create a virtual library. You can see when we select that option, we have a pop-up here that instructs us to select the machine that will host the virtual library device, as well as provide a name for the virtual library device. For this video, we're going to use the Matt PC machine as the host for our virtual library device, and we're going to actually just use the default name as well. You can name this whatever you want. If you had multiple library devices, you could have virtual library device 1, virtual library device 2. If you segregated your virtual library devices for their specific backups, say you had a virtual library device that you were going to use for your Exchange backups, you could cue that into the name. The only real rule in terms of naming your virtual library devices is to use something that will allow you to distinguish between them if you intend to set up multiples in a single backup domain. So again, for this tutorial, we're going to go ahead and use the default name and host for both, and then select OK. When we select OK, we'll be pushed into the properties of Matt PC virtual library device. So this is the properties page for the virtual library device that we're creating. You can see we populate a default path for a storage directory in your virtual library device, which is this D2D directory that resides in C program files, Barracuda, Yosemite Server Backup. That isn't generally a path that we would want to use for our virtual library device. Frequently we'll point these devices out to a network share or to an alternate drive from the system drive on the machine that's hosting the device. So we're going to go ahead and configure a directory just in the root of C on the machine that we're local to right now as our storage folder. So I've gone ahead and just opened up the Windows file browser here, and we're going to create a new folder that we're going to call Virtual Library Device. Since we don't want to use this D2D directory, but rather the virtual library device directory that we created in the root of C, I'm going to delete this path. Then I'm going to select Add, and I'm just going to use the Browse button here to point this virtual library device at that virtual library device directory that I'd created. So we'll drill down on File System and then on C, and here's our virtual library device directory that we'd created. Select that and OK. And now if we click the Test button, we'll get a successful test to that virtual library device path. If this were pointed out to a network share or something that required username and password to authenticate, these fields would become usable, and we could enter both the username and password and select Test to make sure that the credentials that we'd provided were accurate to access the path provided above. You can also configure the capacity for that virtual library device here. We provide this field so you can set a maximum capacity for your virtual library device. Say you had a virtual library device that was residing on a 100 gig drive. Not that we see a lot of 100 gig drives anymore, but if that were the case, we would want to make sure that we didn't have a virtual library device capacity that was higher than the physical capacity of our device. So we're going to go ahead and just set this to 50 gig, and then we're going to select OK. And now we're back on the properties page, and you can see we have a couple other options here. We have drives and storage slots. It helps to think of the virtual library device as just an emulation of a physical tape library. We can have multiple drives and multiple slots, which allow us to store multiple backup media and backup sets on a single device. By default, we're going to create a single drive 100 slot virtual library device. For this tutorial, I'm going to go ahead and emulate some of the most common tape libraries that are out there and configure our virtual library with 2 drives and 24 slots. And we'll go ahead and click Apply and then OK. So we can select the Devices tab and then drill down on Network and our host machine and our Devices directory. And you can see that now we have Matt PC virtual library device. If we drill down on the virtual library device itself, you'll see we have our devices, which are our 2 drives, and then our storage slots. You'll see that we have 24 storage slots which reflect the 24 slots that we added when we created the virtual library device. You can see initially the element status of our slots is invalid media not identified. Since these are virtual media, all that really means is that we've never used any of the slots in this virtual library device. If we were to configure a job with the auto format option, these slots will be formatted and used successively by our job. So for this video, we're not going to get into creating a backup job that's targeted to our virtual library device. We will in future videos cover many different types of backup jobs and different rotation types, as well as all of the different devices supported by Yosemite Server Backup and how to use them within the context of a job. For this video, we've covered everything we set out to accomplish. We've created a new virtual library device, pointed to a non-default location on our host machine. We've gone in and looked at the various configuration options, whether that's pointing to a local share, a network share, a local drive, being able to provide authentication credentials to contact a network share and use it as a virtual library device host. And we've gone in briefly and looked at the devices and storage slots and their default status after configuration. Thanks, and please stay tuned for more videos in the Yosemite Server Backup video tutorial series.